I never thought much about humans. To us, the Yaljan, they were insignificant, just another species with strange customs and primitive technology, trying to carve out their place in a galaxy that didn't need them. But when they showed up on the interstellar stage, something about them always unsettled me. It wasn't their military power, nor their intellect. No, it was something more fundamental, something we overlooked for far too long. My name is Tavik Rowe, a high-ranking member of the Galactic Council's Bureau of Temporal Regulation. I've spent decades ensuring that time flows smoothly across the myriad civilizations under the Council's guidance. Time, after all, is sacred to us Yaljan. It dictates everything, from the rhythm of our lives to our very biology. To tamper with time is to tamper with our existence. So when the humans arrived and began spreading their quaint little calendars, I initially found it laughable. Their insistence on using the Earth's solar cycles to track time completely disconnected from the galactic standards was the height of arrogance. It disrupted the precision with which we govern time. Humans measured years, months, days, based on a single planet's orbit and rotation, without regard for the greater cosmic balance. I argued for the ban, along with many others in the Council. The proposal to outlaw human calendars passed swiftly and without resistance. Earth was forced to adopt the Council's timekeeping systems, as all planets did. We thought it would be the end of the matter. We were wrong. I remember the first anomaly clearly. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I was in my office, overseeing the temporal adjustments for a distant star system on the edge of Talvoth territory. Their seasons were delicate if not perfectly aligned, their crops would fail, and starvation would sweep their colonies. Our temporal sync ensured every planet had the same consistent time structure, preventing natural disasters or societal breakdowns. But on that day, the Talvoth seasons arrived late by a fraction of a cycle. "This must be an error," I muttered, reviewing the data. I sent a team to investigate, expecting a simple technical malfunction. Yet, the more we examined it, the stranger things became. The local time dilation was inexplicable, as though the very fabric of time had shifted. When the Talvoth appealed for help, I promised we'd fix it, unaware of what was to come. More anomalies followed. Minor discrepancies at first, planets experiencing slight irregularities in day length or rotations that didn't line up with our calculations. It wasn't just isolated, it spread. The Zoltari homeworld, which prided itself on hyper-precision, reported its clocks deviating by mere milliseconds, enough to throw off their interplanetary trade routes. The Krellin, masters of bureaucracy and timekeeping, found their planetary chronometers malfunctioning. They blamed technical failures, faulty algorithms, anything but what was really happening. Behind the scenes, I began hearing whispers. Humans. Their old Earth calendars were somehow connected to the anomalies, some said. The idea was absurd. How could a single planet's ancient timekeeping system affect the entire galaxy? I dismissed it, but doubt began to gnaw at me. What if we had underestimated them? The first time I met a human in person was during an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Earth had requested a summit, and their representative, a middle-aged man named Dr. Evan Calder, stood before us with an odd calmness that unnerved me. "Counselors," he began, his voice steady, "you've outlawed our calendars, believing them to be incompatible with your galactic systems. But you've misunderstood something fundamental. Earth's timekeeping is not just a reflection of our planet. It's part of a greater, cosmic rhythm." The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Cosmic rhythm, I scoffed. This was pseudoscience, human superstition trying to pass itself off as logic. "What are you saying, human?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "That your primitive system is somehow causing these anomalies." Dr. Calder looked directly at me, and in his eyes I saw no fear, only certainty. "I'm saying that by outlawing our calendars, you've disrupted something you don't fully understand. Earth's orbit, its rotation, they're more than just local phenomena. They've been in sync with the universe for billions of years, long before we ever started measuring them. Time across the galaxy is starting to slip because you've cut it off from the natural order." A wave of laughter rippled through the chamber, but I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. "This is ridiculous," Counselor Vatra of the Krellin sneered. "Are we to believe that a backwater species like yours controls the flow of time?" Dr. Calder didn't flinch. "Not controls, but Earth is a keystone. You've pulled that keystone out, and now the structure is starting to crumble." The idea was preposterous, and yet the anomalies continued to worsen. Entire planetary systems began reporting irregularities. The Talvoth seasons went completely off-kilter, their crops withering as droughts turned to floods in days. The Zoltari saw their ships miscalculate hyperspace jumps, arriving weeks off schedule. And on Yaljan, my own people whose lives were so intrinsically tied to time began to suffer. I noticed it first in myself, an inability to sleep properly, a disorientation in my daily routine. My colleagues spoke of similar experiences, feeling as though time itself was slipping from their grasp. The council was in chaos. Fingers pointed in every direction, but no one had answers. Dr. Calder's words, once dismissed as human arrogance, started to weigh heavily on my mind. What if he was right? As the galaxy teetered on the brink, I took a risk. I sought him out. The human embassy was far less grand than most alien delegations. It was modest, understated. When I entered, I found Dr. Calder poring over a holographic projection of Earth's solar system, muttering to himself. "I didn't expect you to come," he said without looking up. I stiffened. "You spoke of a cosmic rhythm. Explain it properly this time." He turned to face me, his expression more serious than before. "You ever heard of a circadian rhythm, Tavik?" "Of course," I replied. "The biological clock of living creatures. It governs sleep, wake cycles, and—" "Not just living creatures," he interrupted. "Planets, stars, entire solar systems, they all follow natural rhythms. Earth's calendar is based on its orbit around the sun, the rotation of its moon, the tilting of its axis. It's been that way for billions of years. You didn't just outlaw our calendar, you broke the rhythm that the galaxy has subconsciously been aligned to for longer than anyone realizes." I didn't want to believe him. How could Earth's orbit, a single planet's rotation, affect the timekeeping of a galaxy with thousands of worlds? But the anomalies grew worse. Reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy, time distortions, planets experiencing days that stretched into weeks, hyperspace routes becoming more treacherous as the fabric of time itself twisted. The council was desperate. They needed a solution, and fast. And deep down, I knew Dr. Calder might be our only hope. But could we trust him? Could we trust humans, with their unpredictable nature, to help us fix what we had broken? I left Dr. Calder's office that day, my thoughts heavier than ever. I couldn't escape his words, Earth's rhythm, a keystone of time. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. Planets everywhere were reporting bizarre disruptions, days lengthening, natural cycles thrown into disarray. And the Yaljan, my people, felt it in the very core of our existence. I returned to the council chamber the next day. Chaos reigned as representatives from countless species debated, argued, and pointed fingers. The Krellin, whose entire civilization was built around precise time management, were livid. Their fleets had begun to lose cohesion, schedules falling into disarray. The Talvoth were desperate, their food supplies were dwindling as their crops failed to grow in the off-kilter seasons. But the Zoltari, always cold and calculating, seemed to be watching the situation with a kind of detached interest. That made me uneasy. As I stepped into my seat, I noticed Counselor Vatra of the Krellin glaring at me from across the room. She had been one of the most vocal supporters of the human calendar ban, and now her face was a mask of fury and frustration. "You brought this on us, Tavik," she hissed under her breath as I passed her. "You and your Bureau of Temporal Regulation thought you could dictate time itself." I ignored her, though her words stung. In truth, I wasn't sure if she was wrong. The council convened, and the speaker, a towering Krellin with an imperious air, called the assembly to order. "We are here to discuss the ongoing temporal anomalies," he began, his voice echoing through the grand chamber. "It is clear that the ban on human calendars has had unintended consequences. The question before us now is whether to reverse the decision or find another solution. The room buzzed with conversation, but I remained silent. My mind kept returning to my conversation with Dr. Calder. Could it really be that simple? Could reintroducing Earth's calendars restore the galactic balance? Counselor Vatra stood and addressed the assembly. Reversing the ban is out of the question. We cannot allow a single species to dictate time for the entire galaxy. There must be another way to resolve this. Several voices murmured in agreement, but there were just as many who seemed less certain. I saw Dr. Calder standing at the back of the chamber, watching the proceedings with a calm, measured gaze. "Counselor Tavik," the speaker called, snapping me out of my thoughts. "You have overseen the regulation of time across the galaxy for decades. What is your recommendation?" I felt every eye in the room turn to me. Slowly, I rose to my feet, my palms damp with tension. "My fellow counselors," I began, "we must face the reality of the situation. Our attempts to impose a uniform timekeeping system on the galaxy have failed. The anomalies we are experiencing are not merely technical malfunctions, they are a fundamental disruption in the flow of time itself." There was a murmur of surprise at my admission, but I pressed on. "I have spoken with Dr. Calder of Earth," I continued, "and while his theories may seem unorthodox, there is mounting evidence to suggest that Earth's timekeeping is connected to a larger cosmic order. The anomalies began after we outlawed human calendars. I believe we must reinstate them if we are to restore balance." There was an uproar. Several counselors leapt to their feet, shouting objections. Counselor Vatra's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Are you seriously suggesting that we let humans dictate the flow of time?" she spat. "This is madness. You're buying into their primitive superstitions." "Primitive or not," I shot back, "their system worked. Ours is failing. We have to at least consider the possibility." Vatra sneered. "And if you're wrong? If this is just another human ploy to gain influence over the galaxy?" "I don't think it is," I replied, my voice steady. "The humans didn't want this. They didn't ask for their calendars to become a galactic necessity. But the fact remains, the longer we resist, the worse the anomalies become." The speaker raised a hand for silence. "We will not decide this by shouting. Dr. Calder," he called, "please step forward." Dr. Calder moved to the center of the chamber, his expression calm and composed. He didn't seem intimidated by the hostile glares from half the council. "Counselor Tavik believes that restoring Earth's calendars could stabilize the temporal anomalies," the speaker said. "Is this your assessment as well?" Dr. Calder nodded. "Yes. As I've explained, Earth's calendar isn't just a human invention. It's a reflection of natural cycles that have existed for billions of years. The galaxy has become attuned to those cycles without even realizing it. By outlawing our calendars, you've created a dissonance, a temporal imbalance that's growing worse by the day." "And how do we know this isn't just an elaborate scheme to force us into dependence on human timekeeping?" Counselor Vatra demanded. Calder's gaze hardened. "If we wanted control, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd have let you all collapse under your own weight." Vatra clenched her fists, but before she could respond, the speaker intervened. "Enough. We will deliberate." As the council entered a closed session to debate the issue, I found myself pacing the halls outside the chamber, my mind racing. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of something far more profound than any of us realized. Dr. Calder's words echoed in my mind. Earth as a keystone, the galaxy aligned to its rhythms. What did that even mean? And how could a single planet's calendar affect time on such a massive scale? As I paced, I noticed Dr. Calder sitting on a bench, studying a small, old-fashioned timepiece, a relic from Earth, no doubt. "You seem troubled, Tavik," he said without looking up. I stopped, folding my arms. "You're asking us to believe that Earth holds the key to restoring time across the galaxy. But I still don't understand how that's possible. How could your planet's calendar be so important?" Calder smiled faintly, as if the answer was obvious. "You're thinking about time the way most people do, as a linear progression. something that can be measured and controlled. But time is more fluid than that. Earth's rotation, its orbit around the sun, they're part of a greater, cosmic cycle. And when you tried to impose your system over ours, you disrupted that cycle. I frowned. But why Earth? Why not any other planet? Calder's expression grew more serious. That's the mystery, isn't it? Maybe it's because Earth is old, older than many of the worlds in the galaxy. Or maybe it's something else, something tied to the fundamental nature of the universe. All I know is that when Earth's rhythms are cut off, the galaxy starts to fall apart. I was about to ask more, but before I could, a message flashed on my communicator. The council had reached a decision. The speaker's voice boomed through the chamber as we reassembled. The council has voted. By a narrow margin, we have decided to temporarily reinstate human calendars on a trial basis to assess whether this will alleviate the temporal anomalies. Earth's calendar will once again be recognized, effective immediately. A wave of tension washed over the room. Some counselors were visibly relieved, while others, like Vatra, looked furious. But the decision was made. Let us hope, the speaker concluded, that this restores order to the galaxy. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions. Had we done the right thing? Would this really fix the anomalies, or had we just placed the fate of the galaxy in human hands? As I lay in my quarters, staring at the stars beyond the window, I felt a strange sense of unease. Time was slipping, shifting, as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next day, the change was already in motion. As soon as Earth's calendar was reinstated, reports of stabilization began pouring in from across the galaxy. The Krellin fleets were moving on schedule again, and the Tauvath crops had begun to grow as expected. The daily chaos, while not fully resolved, was noticeably diminished. Time, it seemed, was beginning to flow properly once more. But I wasn't comforted by the improvement. It was too quick, too clean. It felt unnatural, almost as if time itself had simply snapped back into place under the will of Earth's strange influence. I stood in the Bureau's observation deck, staring at the star charts, watching the data streams that measured time distortion. The patterns had smoothed out, but there was still a tremor, an undercurrent of instability that none of the reports seemed to address. "Tavik," a voice called from behind me. It was Saren, one of my most trusted subordinates in the Bureau, and one of the few people I could truly confide in. "The reports from the Yaljan colony on Vexus Prime are coming in. They've stabilized." "Good," I replied absent-mindedly, still fixated on the charts. "Any anomalies left?" Saren hesitated. "No major anomalies, but there's something odd. The colonies have resumed normal time cycles, but we're still seeing small fluctuations in certain sectors. They're minor, almost imperceptible, but they're there." I turned to face him. "Where?" "Mostly along the outer rim," he said, tapping his datapad to bring up the readings. "Nothing critical, but these sectors are still experiencing time compression. Days are running shorter than they should be." I frowned. Time compression was a dangerous phenomenon, an acceleration of temporal flow that could wreak havoc on a planet's ecosystems, and worse, on the beings living within it. If it wasn't corrected, entire worlds could burn out in decades, their populations aging and dying in what felt like the blink of an eye. "Get a team on it," I ordered. "If the anomalies are still lingering, we need to find out why." Saren nodded and hurried off, leaving me alone in the observation deck. I gazed at the stars beyond the glass, feeling a growing sense of unease. Earth's calendar had restored order, but not fully. There was still something wrong, something we hadn't accounted for, and if we didn't figure it out soon, the consequences could be far worse than anything we'd imagined. That evening, I found myself in the Bureau's archives, poring over ancient records and timekeeping systems from across the galaxy. I needed to understand how this had all gone so wrong. We had introduced a uniform system for time, built on the consensus of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, but it had failed utterly, and Earth, of all places, had somehow become the linchpin in restoring balance. As I scrolled through the records, one entry caught my eye, a fragment from the pre-contact era of Earth, a time before they had even ventured beyond their own atmosphere. It spoke of their ancient calendars, systems that were not just based on the cycles of the sun and moon, but also on strange, mystical concepts, times of power, periods when the veil between realities was thin. I scoffed at the idea, superstitious nonsense. But then I thought about the temporal anomalies, the way the galaxy had bent and twisted around Earth's timekeeping. Maybe there was more to this than simple planetary rotation. I was still deep in thought when my communicator buzzed. It was Saren again, and his voice was tense. "Tavik, you need to come to the Central Observation Station, now." When I arrived at the station, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Saren was standing over a central console, his face pale. Around him, the other bureau officers were muttering nervously, their eyes glued to the screens displaying real-time temporal data from across the galaxy. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping closer. Saren didn't look up. "We found the source of the lingering anomalies." He tapped a few buttons on his console, and a map of the galaxy appeared. Several regions were highlighted in red, each one a sector that was still experiencing time compression. "They're all concentrated along the outer rim," Saren said, his voice low, "and they're growing." I frowned. "Growing? I thought you said they were minor fluctuations." "They were," Saren said, shaking his head. "But in the last few hours, the compression has started accelerating. It's spreading faster than we anticipated." I stared at the map, my mind racing. Time compression on this scale could tear entire sectors apart. It didn't make sense. Why would the anomalies be getting worse when Earth's calendar had supposedly restored balance? "Is there a common factor in these sectors?" I asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. Saren hesitated. "Yes, every one of these sectors has a human presence." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Humans," Saren repeated. "Every one of these sectors is home to colonies or outposts with a significant human population. And the more humans there are, the faster the time compression spreads." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling. Could it be that Earth's influence wasn't just a matter of calendars and planetary rotation? Was it the humans themselves who were affecting the flow of time? "This doesn't make any sense," I muttered. "Why would the presence of humans cause temporal anomalies?" Saren shrugged helplessly. "We don't know. But the data is clear. The more humans there are, the more time is compressed." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The implications were staggering. If humans were somehow linked to the fabric of time itself, then their presence in the galaxy could be far more dangerous than we had ever realized. "We need to alert the Council," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "If this spreads any further—" Before I could finish, the station's alarm system blared to life, cutting me off. Red lights flashed across the control room, and a voice crackled over the comm system. "Warning. Temporal anomaly detected in Sector 49C. Time compression accelerating." Saren's eyes widened in horror. "That's one of the Krellin core worlds." I felt a surge of dread. If time compression was accelerating in a Krellin core world, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Krellin were one of the most advanced and populous species in the galaxy. If their world fell victim to time compression, billions could age and die within days. "We need to act now," I said, turning to Saren. "Get a team together. We're going to that sector." Saren looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Tavik, are you serious? The time compression there is out of control. It could affect us too." "I know the risks," I replied grimly. "But we need to understand what's happening, and we won't do that from here. If humans are the key to this, we need to figure out how." Saren hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll assemble a team." A few hours later, we were aboard a Bureau ship, speeding toward the Krellin core world of Velkar. The mood among the crew was tense. Everyone knew the dangers of entering a region affected by time compression. But we had no choice. If we didn't figure out what was causing this, The entire galaxy could be at risk. As we approached Velkar, the first signs of temporal distortion became apparent. The stars outside the viewport seemed to warp and shift, their light bending in strange, disorienting ways. The ship's instruments were going haywire, unable to provide accurate readings of time or distance. "We're entering the anomaly zone," Saren said, his voice tight with apprehension. "Prepare for temporal fluctuations." I gripped the edge of my seat, bracing myself for the worst. But even I wasn't prepared for what we saw when we arrived. The surface of Velkar was a nightmare. Entire cities had collapsed into ruin, their structures warped and twisted as if they had been stretched and compressed by some invisible force. The sky was a swirling vortex of colors, and the atmosphere seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy, and everywhere we looked, there were bodies. Frozen in place, mid-step, mid-motion, like statues carved from time itself. "What the hell happened here?" one of the crew whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were standing at the edge of something far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. And whatever it was, it had to do with the humans. The landscape of Velkar was beyond anything I had ever witnessed. We stepped off the ship and into a world frozen in a temporal nightmare. The Krillin citizens were locked in time, their bodies caught mid-motion. Some were walking, others mid-conversation, and a few reaching for their children. They weren't dead, they were paused, as if time had forgotten them. I waved my hand in front of a frozen Krillin male who was halfway through lifting a package. Nothing. His eyes were wide open, but there was no flicker of consciousness. The air felt wrong, heavy, as if the atmosphere itself was weighed down by time's refusal to move. Saren walked up beside me, his face pale as he examined the destruction. This is impossible. We're seeing the effects of time compression, but they're too advanced. The distortion shouldn't be this severe so quickly." "Yet here we are," I muttered, trying to suppress the growing dread gnawing at my insides. Velkar was thriving yesterday. Now it's a tomb. "We need to find the epicenter of the anomaly," Saren said, pulling out his scanning device. "If there's any chance of stopping this, it's there." The rest of the team fanned out cautiously. The Krillin capital city lay before us, a skeletal husk of its former glory. Buildings loomed like ancient relics, twisted by time's touch. Streets that should have been bustling with activity were filled with Krillin bodies frozen in place, trapped in this temporal limbo. As we walked deeper into the city, the temporal distortions grew more intense. I could feel them in my bones, a creeping sensation of disorientation, like time was stretching and pulling at me, trying to tear me apart. Suddenly, Saren's device beeped frantically. "The readings are spiking," he said, his voice tinged with alarm. "The epicenter is close." We rounded a corner, and there it was, the center of the distortion. A massive structure, once the heart of Velkar's government, now stood as a monument to the madness that had consumed the world. The building was twisted beyond recognition, its walls warped and curling as though time itself had attacked it. But that wasn't what drew our attention. In front of the building, standing in the center of a massive plaza, was a single figure, a human. My heart skipped a beat. He wasn't frozen like the others. He was moving slowly, methodically examining something on the ground. As we approached, I could see that his clothes were tattered, his skin bruised and weathered as if he had been trapped here for far longer than should have been possible. Saren was the first to speak. "You there, identify yourself." The human looked up at us, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, something ancient, something that didn't belong. But then he spoke, his voice hoarse but surprisingly calm. "My name is Marcus," he said, standing up straight. I'm the last one." "The last what?" I demanded, stepping forward. "What have you done here?" Marcus looked around at the frozen Krillin and the warped city. "I didn't do this," he said quietly. "I tried to stop it, but it's too late now. Time is broken." "Broken?" Saren echoed. "What do you mean broken? Explain yourself." The human Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It started months ago. Time began to slip. At first, it was small things, days feeling shorter, clocks running fast. But it got worse. Entire weeks disappeared. Then months. The Krellin government didn't know what to do. They tried everything. But the more they pushed, the worse it got. I narrowed my eyes. What does this have to do with you? Everything, Marcus said, his voice dark. The Krellin brought me here to fix it. I'm a time specialist, or at least, I was. They thought I could find a way to stabilize their world. But it wasn't just Velkar that was affected. It was everywhere. All of the Outer Rim colonies, every place where humans had settled, were experiencing the same thing. He looked at us, his eyes hollow. Earth's calendar isn't just a tool, it's a command, and when the galaxy outlawed it, time rebelled. Saren took a step back, his face pale. You're saying the human calendar controls time itself? Marcus shook his head. Not exactly, but Earth has a connection to time that no other species has. We don't know why, but our cycles, our days and nights, they're linked to the flow of time in the galaxy. When you outlawed our calendar, you broke that connection. And now, time is unraveling. This is madness, I muttered, but even as I said it, the pieces were falling into place. The minor fluctuations, the time compression, the human presence in the affected sectors. Marcus was right somehow. Earth's influence over time was real, and by rejecting it, we had triggered a catastrophe. We have to reverse the law, Saren said suddenly. We have to reinstate Earth's calendar completely. It's not that simple, Marcus said. The damage is done. Even if you bring back the calendar, it won't be enough to stop the compression. Time is already too far gone. I felt a cold pit of dread form in my stomach. Then what do we do? Marcus looked at the twisted city, his face grim. There's only one option left. We have to fix time itself. We have to go back to Earth. The flight back to the Bureau was silent. Saren and I sat in the cockpit, watching the stars blur past us. Marcus had agreed to come with us, but his presence unnerved me. He knew too much about time, about Earth's influence, and I didn't like it. But we had no choice. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Marcus seemed to be the only one who understood the full scope of what was happening. We need to convince the Council to reinstate Earth's calendar fully, Saren said, breaking the silence, and we need to do it before the compression spreads any further. I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. Marcus had hinted that there was more to Earth's control over time than just their calendar. What if the solution wasn't as simple as reinstating their time system? What if there was something deeper at play, something tied to Earth's very nature? As we docked at the Bureau's central station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into something far more dangerous than we realized. Time was slipping, and the more we tried to control it, the more it resisted. The council chamber was as imposing as ever, its towering walls and vaulted ceilings designed to make even the most powerful beings feel small. But today, it felt suffocating. The council members sat in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern as we presented our findings. Marcus stood at the center of the chamber, his presence a stark contrast to the grandeur around him. He looked tired, worn, but there was a calm certainty in his voice as he spoke. The temporal anomalies are accelerating, he said. The time compression is spreading faster than we anticipated. If we don't act now, entire sectors will be consumed. Councillor Vexus, one of the more skeptical members, leaned forward. And you believe reinstating Earth's calendar will stop this? Marcus hesitated. It will help, but it won't be enough. Time has already been damaged. We need to go further. Further how? Vexus demanded. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. We need to return to Earth. The answer lies there. The chamber erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Councillor Vexus shook his head, his voice dripping with skepticism. You expect us to believe that a single planet, a primitive world like Earth, holds the key to saving the entire galaxy? Marcus didn't flinch. Yes. I watched the exchange in silence, my mind racing. The more Marcus spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Earth's calendar. This was about something much bigger, something tied to the very fabric of time itself. And Earth, for reasons I still couldn't fully comprehend, was at the center of it all. "We don't have a choice," Saren said, stepping forward. "If we don't act now, time compression will spread across the galaxy. Billions will die." The council fell silent, their expressions grim. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Vexus spoke. "Very well," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "You have permission to go to Earth. But know this, if you fail, the consequences will be on your head." As we left the council chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. We were going to Earth, the source of the galaxy's time, the heart of the mystery that had torn Velkar apart. And deep down, I knew that whatever we found there would change everything. The journey to Earth was long, tense, and filled with a weight of unspoken fears. I sat in the control room, staring at the star map as we closed in on the Sol system. Saren was at the helm, quiet and focused. Marcus sat behind him, eyes scanning some data on his personal device. The silence wasn't comfortable, it was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, making every breath feel too loud, every shift in your seat too jarring. We were heading toward Earth, the origin of the galactic anomaly, the source of the calendar that had once governed the flow of time for the entire galaxy. It was madness. How could one planet, so backward by every metric, hold such power? I still didn't fully believe it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Marcus was right, something about Earth had thrown everything out of balance. The moment we entered the Sol system, everything felt different. The weight of time itself shifted, like we were swimming against a current that had suddenly grown stronger. The stars outside the viewport seemed to blur, not from the ship's speed, but from the subtle distortions that now surrounded us. "Are you feeling it too?" Saren asked without looking up from the console. I nodded. "It's heavier, like time itself is pressing down on us." "It gets worse the closer you get to Earth," Marcus said quietly. "It's like the planet is a magnet for time. Everything bends around it." "What does that even mean?" I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. But no one answered. The reality of what we were facing was too vast for simple explanations. Earth loomed ahead, a blue and green jewel hanging in the void of space. It looked so small, so fragile, yet it held the key to unraveling the temporal chaos that threatened the galaxy. We touched down on the outskirts of an old human settlement. The place had been abandoned for decades, maybe centuries. The buildings were crumbling, overtaken by nature. Time had not been kind to this place, and yet, despite the decay, there was a strange sense of stillness here, as though the passage of years had slowed to a crawl. Marcus led the way, his steps deliberate as he guided us toward an ancient structure. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Massive stone pillars, worn smooth by time, surrounded a central courtyard. At the center of the courtyard was a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a single object, an old human timekeeping device. A clock. "It's been here since the beginning," Marcus said softly, his eyes fixed on the clock. "This is where it all started." I frowned, looking at the simple, ancient device. "You're telling me that this thing controls time?" "Not directly," Marcus replied, stepping forward. "But it's symbolic. This clock represents Earth's relationship with time. It was built by some of the first humans to measure the flow of days, weeks, and years. Over millennia, humans became the masters of time. Their calendar, their measurements, all became intertwined with the natural order of the universe." Saren crossed his arms, skeptical. "So what do we do? Turn the clock back and hope everything resets?" Marcus chuckled darkly. "If only it were that simple. No, what we need to do is synchronize this clock with the rest of the galaxy." The outlawing of Earth's calendar disrupted that synchronization. Time is fragmented, breaking apart. We need to restore the balance. I looked around, feeling the oppressive weight of the place. The air was thick with an unspoken power, a force that tugged at the edges of reality. And how do we do that? Marcus knelt before the clock, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the device. "We activate it. We restore Earth's control over time. Saren and I exchanged glances. There was something in Marcus's voice, something unsettling. He wasn't just a scientist or a specialist. There was more to him, something he wasn't telling us. Marcus, I said slowly, what exactly happens when you activate this thing? He didn't look up, but his voice was tight. Time will obey again, but there's a cost. A cost? Saren took a step forward, his voice sharp. What kind of cost? Marcus finally stood, turning to face us. His expression was grim. The galaxy will be reset. Time will flow properly again, but only if Earth becomes the center of it all. The rest of the galaxy will lose control over their own time systems. Every planet, every civilization, they'll all be forced to follow Earth's cycles. My stomach dropped. You're saying the galaxy will have to live by Earth's time? Yes, Marcus said simply. It's the only way to stabilize the flow of time. The calendar, the cycles, it all has to come from Earth. That's why the Krellan government was so desperate to outlaw it. They knew that if Earth's calendar was reinstated, their own systems would be rendered obsolete. They'd have no control. Saren's face darkened. This is insanity. You're telling us that billions of lives across the galaxy will be bound to Earth's time. That every planet will have to adjust their days, their years, to fit with Earth's calendar. It's the only way, Marcus said, his voice firm. If we don't do this, time will continue to unravel. The temporal distortions will spread, and eventually, all of existence will collapse. I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on us. There was no good outcome here. Either we allowed the galaxy to be ruled by Earth's time, or we watched everything fall apart. Saren shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. There has to be another way. We can't just force this on the galaxy. There isn't, Marcus said, his voice quiet but unwavering. This is how it's always been. Earth has always been the center of time. You just didn't know it. I looked at the clock, its face cracked and worn, and realized the truth in his words. Earth had always been at the heart of the galaxy's time, even if we hadn't known it. The calendar, the cycles, they weren't just human inventions. They were the very fabric of reality. Saren turned to me, his eyes filled with a desperation I hadn't seen before. We can't let this happen. The galaxy can't be ruled by Earth's time. We have to find another solution. But as I looked at Marcus, at the clock, I knew there was no other solution. The unraveling had already begun. We were standing on the edge of a precipice, and the only way to stop the fall was to embrace Earth's control. I don't like it either, I said softly. But if this is the only way to stop the temporal collapse... Saren stared at me, disbelief and anger flashing across his face. But he knew, deep down, that I was right. There was no other choice. Marcus stepped forward, his hand hovering over the clock. Once I do this, there's no going back. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. Do it. The moment Marcus activated the clock, I felt a shift and almost imperceptible change in the air, like the universe had taken a breath and exhaled. The distortions around us faded, the weight of time lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the world felt normal. But it wasn't normal. Not really. The galaxy had changed. Earth was now the anchor, the center of all time. Every planet, every civilization would now have to live by Earth's rules. As we stood in the quiet of the courtyard, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The Krellan, the Tharkish, the other races, they wouldn't accept this. There would be resistance, conflict, maybe even war, but it didn't matter. Time belonged to Earth now. The aftermath was immediate. As we returned to orbit, our communications console lit up like a supernova. Messages from every corner of the galaxy, frantic calls from governments, militaries, and scientific coalitions. The other worlds had felt the shift as soon as Marcus activated the clock. Their timekeeping systems, their chronometric infrastructures, everything had realigned, forcing their worlds into synchronization with Earth's cycles. It was chaos. Multiple signals incoming, Saren said, his voice tense as he skimmed through the rapidly piling alerts. The Tharkesh are threatening to sever diplomatic relations, and the Krellin, they've declared this an act of war. My stomach tightened. This was exactly what I'd feared. Restoring Earth's calendar hadn't just stabilized time, it had thrown the galaxy into turmoil. Entire civilizations were now bound to a planet they had long dismissed as insignificant. The backlash would be catastrophic. I turned to Marcus, who was sitting quietly in the corner, his face a mask of calm amidst the storm. "You knew this would happen?" "Yes," he replied simply. "Then why?" I demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You've destabilized the entire galaxy. Billions of lives are going to be affected." "They were already affected," he cut in sharply. "The distortions were tearing the galaxy apart. You saw it yourself, time was fragmenting. Without a center, the chaos would have spread. Earth's calendar is more than a system of dates. It's a stabilizing force. The galaxy has always been structured around it, whether they acknowledged it or not." I clenched my fists, wanting to argue, but I couldn't. I'd felt the truth of his words when the clock activated. Time had settled, reality had solidified. But at what cost? "The galaxy won't accept this," I said quietly. "There'll be revolt wars. Earth will become a target." "They'll try to fight it," Marcus acknowledged. "But there's nothing they can do. Earth's influence is woven into the fabric of time itself now. Any attempt to overthrow it will only lead to more instability." I turned away, staring out at the blue-green planet spinning peacefully below us. Earth, the cradle of humanity, and now the center of the galaxy's time. It was madness, but it was also undeniable. The first skirmishes began within hours. Fleets from the Krellin and Tharkesh systems converged on Earth's orbital perimeter, demanding that the temporal tyranny be undone. They called it an abomination, a violation of every natural law, and they blamed us, the three beings who had stood by and let it happen. A Krellin warship appeared on our scanners, its weapons primed and ready. "They're hailing us," Saren said grimly. "Put them through." The face that appeared on the screen was stern, lined with the deep ridges that marked a Krellin elder. His eyes burned with a hatred so intense I could almost feel it through the viewport. "You will deactivate the human artifact immediately," he snarled, "or we will burn you and this primitive planet to cinders." "Elder Traxon," Marcus greeted him calmly. "You know that's not possible. The clock is active. Earth is the center now. Any attempt to destroy it will only worsen the temporal instability." "Lies," Traxon roared. "This is a human trick, a plot to enslave the galaxy. You think we'll submit to their tyranny?" "This isn't about submission," I said, stepping forward. "It's about survival. The temporal distortions were real. You saw them yourself. If we hadn't activated the clock—" "Silence!" Traxon's voice was a thunderclap, his ridged face twisting with fury. "You speak of survival, but you have destroyed everything. The Krellin will not bow to human time. We will rip this clock from your world's bones and cast it into the void." The connection cut off abruptly, and a moment later the Krellin warship surged forward, its weapons blazing. Alarms screamed through the bridge as energy blast rocked our ship. "Shields at 80%, Saren shouted, his fingers flying across the controls. "They're not holding back." "Return fire," I ordered, but it was already too late. More Krellin ships were appearing, blinking into existence around us in a coordinated strike, and they weren't alone. Tharkesh vessels, sleek and deadly, slid into view, their cannons aimed squarely at us. "We're outnumbered," Saren muttered, his voice tight. "We won't survive this." My mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to de-escalate. But even as I considered our options, a chilling thought struck me. If Earth was destroyed, what would happen to time? Would it unravel again, plunging the galaxy back into chaos? Or would the consequences be even worse? Marcus seemed to sense my hesitation. He stepped forward, his expression calm and resolved. "There's only one way to end this." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Let them fight," he said quietly. "Let them see the futility of their resistance." Saren turned to him, disbelief written across his face. Are you insane? If they destroy Earth? They can't destroy it, Marcus interrupted. Not completely. Not without dooming themselves. They'll realize that eventually. But first, they need to try. They need to understand that Earth is not just a planet. It's the anchor of their own existence now. The Krellin ships fired again, and our shields flared, straining under the assault. My instincts screamed at me to run, to find a way to escape the maelstrom. But Marcus's words held me in place. He was right. The galaxy needed to see the consequences of their actions. Only then would they understand. Are you suggesting we just wait? I asked incredulously. Yes, Marcus said softly. We wait. We hold the line, and we show them that time itself is now Earth's domain. The battle raged around us, ships darting and weaving in a deadly dance of light and fire. But even as the Krellin and Tharkesh fleets closed in, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't a fight we could win through force. It was a fight for understanding a battle of wills. And Earth's will was stronger than any weapon they could bring to bear. Hours passed. The Krellin and Tharkesh threw everything they had at us, wave after wave of ships battering against Earth's defenses. But the planet endured, and slowly, grudgingly, the attacks began to falter. They're pulling back, Saren murmured, disbelief coloring his voice. I watched as the enemy fleets retreated, their ships limping away from the battlefield. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was something, a recognition of reality. They'll come back, I said quietly. They won't stop fighting. No, Marcus agreed, but they'll think twice before challenging Earth again, and when they do return, we'll be ready. I looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had been forever changed by our actions. Time obeyed Earth now. The rest of the universe would have to accept that fact, whether they liked it or not. Because Earth was no longer just another world. It was the beating heart of time itself. As the remnants of the enemy fleets retreated into the black, I found myself contemplating the strange new reality we had created. Earth was now the undeniable center of time, a fact as inescapable as gravity. No matter how fiercely the Krellin or Tharkesh opposed it, they were bound to this world in a way they could not escape. But that didn't mean they wouldn't try. Already, the comms were lighting up again with threats and demands from various systems. The political fallout of Earth's ascendance was just beginning, and I knew that the galaxy was teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous than a few skirmishes. The balance of power had shifted, and the struggle to reclaim it would be long and brutal. I turned to Marcus, who was still seated, his calm gaze fixed on the now clear screen before us. You're quiet, I said. Are you not concerned about what's to come? Marcus smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with a strange certainty. The galaxy is going to rage against this change. It's inevitable. They'll fight, they'll protest, they'll threaten war. But none of it will matter in the end. And why is that? I asked, genuinely curious. The man had an unsettling confidence that made me uneasy, even now after witnessing the truth of his words. Because they're all trapped by time, he said simply. And time now flows from Earth. I frowned, not entirely satisfied with his cryptic response. You're saying there's nothing they can do to undo this? That no matter what they try, Earth's dominance over time will remain? Marcus nodded. Correct. Time is not a force you can simply unmake. It's intrinsic to everything. And now, Earth's cycles are the baseline. They can rage all they want, but they'll have to fall in line eventually or suffer the consequences. Saren, who had been monitoring the external sensors and systems, cut in. We're still receiving long-range communications from several major factions. Most are calling for a ceasefire, but others are demanding Earth hand over control of the clock. I grimaced. Of course they are. Everyone wants to control time now. If Earth has that power, they'll see it as the ultimate prize. Let them come, Marcus said quietly. They'll soon find that the clock isn't a weapon they can simply wield. There was a finality in his words that sent a shiver down my spine. But I knew he was right. Earth wasn't just controlling time, it had become a part of the very fabric of it. Any attempt to seize that power would be like trying to harness a star. The risk of catastrophe was too great. But knowing that wouldn't stop them from trying. Saren spoke up again, his tone more serious. "Sir, I'm picking up a new fleet entering the system. It's sizable." I turned sharply to the console, my heart sinking as I saw the data scrolling across the screen. This wasn't a handful of warships sent to test Earth's defenses. This was a full-scale armada. Hundreds of vessels from various factions, all converging on Earth like predators circling their prey. "They're sending everything they have," I muttered, my stomach knotting. "They're not just testing us this time. They're trying to break us." Marcus remained seated, unbothered by the growing threat. "They'll try, and they'll fail." "How can you be so sure?" I demanded, frustration creeping into my voice. "This isn't just a few rogue ships. This is an entire coalition of some of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. They're coming for Earth." Marcus stood, finally turning to face me. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that was hard to bear. "They think they can attack Earth, disrupt the clock, and restore their control over time. But what they don't understand is that Earth's role is no longer simply mechanical. It's a cosmic shift. It's beyond their comprehension." I stared at him, the weight of his words slowly sinking in. He wasn't talking about technology. He was talking about something far greater, something deeper than even I had realized. The clock wasn't just a tool. It was a fundamental force now, something woven into the very structure of the universe. And any attempt to dismantle it could tear reality itself apart. "They'll destroy themselves," Marcus said quietly. "They don't know it yet, but every shot they fire, every attempt they make to seize control, will only accelerate their own downfall." A cold dread settled over me. "And what about us? What happens to Earth?" Marcus was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the planet below. "We endure. We always have." The Armada's approach was swift. Within hours, the skies above Earth were filled with warships from every corner of the galaxy. The Krellin were there, of course, their massive battleships bristling with weaponry. The Tharkesh had returned as well, their sleek vessels moving in precise formation. But there were others, two factions I hadn't even known existed, all united in their desire to undo what had been done. From the bridge of our ship, I watched in tense silence as the fleet encircled the planet, preparing to strike. There was no diplomatic overture this time, no ultimatum or demand. They were here for one purpose only, to destroy the clock and reclaim control over time. "They're positioning for a full-scale assault," Saren reported, his voice tight with tension. "Earth's defense grid is coming online, but it might not be enough." I nodded grimly. The planetary defense grid had been activated as soon as the first ships appeared, but against an armada of this size, it would be hard-pressed to hold. And then the firing began. The Krellin struck first, their ships unleashing a barrage of energy beams that lanced through space, slamming into Earth's orbital defenses. The shields flared and buckled under the onslaught, but they held for now. The Tharkesh followed suit, their cannons sending pulses of destructive energy rippling toward the planet. The skies above Earth lit up with the furious exchange of fire, a chaotic ballet of destruction as the planet fought to defend itself. I gripped the edge of the console, my heart pounding in my chest as the battle raged on. The shields were holding, but barely. It was only a matter of time before they collapsed. "We can't hold out forever," Saren muttered, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to reroute power to the failing shields. "They'll break through eventually." I turned to Marcus, who stood calmly by the viewport, watching the battle with an unnerving detachment. "What now?" I demanded. "What do we do?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the distant ships as they continued their relentless assault. And then, finally, he spoke. "We do nothing." I blinked, stunned by his words. "What? Nothing? We're about to be overwhelmed, and you're saying we should do nothing?" Marcus turned to me, his expression calm but resolute. "The clock will protect us. It's not just Earth's time they're fighting against. It's the universe itself. They'll break before we do. I stared at him, unsure whether to believe him or to call him mad. But even as I opened my mouth to argue, something strange began to happen. The ships outside began to slow not their movements, but the very passage of time around them. The energy beams they fired seemed to stretch and warp, bending through space as if caught in some unseen current. It was as if time itself was rebelling against them. "They're fighting against the flow of time," Marcus said softly, "and time always wins." I stood frozen, watching the scene before me unfold with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Armada, once poised to obliterate Earth, was faltering. Time itself was turning against them. Krellin warships, previously sleek and agile, now appeared sluggish, their movements distorted by the warping of temporal forces. The powerful energy beams that had been firing relentlessly toward Earth's defense grid had stretched into impossibly long arcs, flickering like faint remnants of their former strength. But it wasn't just the weapons and ships. I could see the crews within the vessel's alien silhouettes moving in fits and starts like they were trapped in some nightmarish loop. Every second stretched into infinity for them, as they fought not against Earth's defenses, but against the very fabric of time. "What is happening?" I muttered aloud, though I didn't expect an answer. The sight was too surreal, too far beyond my understanding. Marcus, however, seemed entirely unfazed. His hands clasped behind his back, he stood at the viewport, watching the cosmic unraveling with a calm, almost satisfied expression. "They're struggling," he said quietly, "but they can't break free. Time obeys Earth's will now. The more they fight it, the more entangled they become." I stared at him, trying to wrap my mind around his words. "But how? How does Earth have this kind of power?" "It's not Earth itself," he replied. "It's the synchronization. The clock isn't just marking the passage of time anymore, it's dictating it. The galaxy's time flows from here now, and those who oppose it are bound to lose. They're fighting against something they don't understand." I shook my head. "But if time is bending like this, couldn't it be dangerous? Couldn't it affect Earth as well?" Marcus turned toward me, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "Not while we control it." It was then I realized the scope of what had happened. This wasn't just about dominance. This wasn't merely Earth claiming its place as a galactic power. Earth had become the center of existence itself. Time, the most fundamental force of all, now bent to humanity's will. And those who tried to oppose it, well, I was watching what happened to them. The alien fleet outside, once massive and intimidating, had become a twisted caricature of itself. Ships hung in the void, some trapped in loops that played out over and over. I could see Krellin vessels spinning in place, their engines firing again and again, but never moving forward. Tharkish warships were frozen mid-attack, their sleek forms rippling as though trapped in molasses. The chaos was absolute, but it wasn't just disarray, it was dissolution. Time was erasing them. "They're collapsing," I whispered, horror mingling with fascination as entire sections of the fleet began to vanish, not in explosions or flames, but in slow, drawn-out disintegrations. First the hulls, then the crews inside, unraveling like fabric fraying at the edges of the universe. Saren, standing at the console, could only gape at the spectacle. They're being erased," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like time is eating them alive." My pulse quickened. Was this the price for challenging Earth? The utter annihilation of anyone who dared oppose humanity's control over time. I had thought the clock was a weapon, something to enforce dominance. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. "What about the rest of the galaxy?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. "If this is happening here, what about the other systems? Are they going to suffer the same fate?" Marcus glanced at me, a shadow passing across his face for the first time. "That depends on them. If they accept the clock, accept Earth as the anchor of time, they will be fine. But those who resist, they'll share the fate of this fleet." It was a chilling thought. The entire galaxy was being held hostage by time itself, and Earth held the key. The battle, if it could even be called that anymore, was over in what felt like minutes, though time had become such a fluid concept that I couldn't be sure. The Krellin and Tharkesh fleets were gone, their massive armada reduced to nothing more than cosmic dust drifting silently in the void. I took a deep breath, trying to process the enormity of what I had just witnessed. Earth's enemies had been erased, not through firepower or brute force, but by time itself, and the realization that this power was now in the hands of humanity sent a deep, unsettling shiver through me. "Are they all gone?" Saren asked, his voice shaky. "Every last one." Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the viewport. "They are, and now the galaxy will know." "Know what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "That there's no going back," Marcus said softly. "Earth is the center now. Time flows from here, and everyone, everywhere, must adapt." "But how will the other factions respond?" Saren asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. "They'll see what happened here, and they'll know what the clock can do. Some of them will try to resist, won't they?" Marcus turned to him, his expression hardening. "They can try. But after this, most will understand the futility. The galaxy is ruled by time, and time now serves Earth." There was a long, heavy silence as the full weight of his words settled over us. The war was over, but the ramifications were only just beginning. In the days that followed, word spread across the galaxy of what had happened. The destruction of the Krellin and Tharkesh armada had been a message, clear and unmistakable. Earth was no longer a planet to be ignored or underestimated. It was the hub of the universe now, the axis upon which all time revolved. I saw the effects almost immediately. Communications from distant factions, once defiant and threatening, became conciliatory, even desperate. They knew they were out of options. To defy Earth was to risk annihilation not through weapons or armies, but through the relentless march of time itself. Some factions tried to bargain, offering resources or alliances in exchange for a place in the new order. Others, more pragmatic, simply surrendered, their leaders issuing statements of loyalty to Earth's new calendar, acknowledging the inevitable truth that time had a new master. And yet, even as the galaxy seemed to fall in line, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The power Earth wielded over time was absolute, but it was also terrifying. What happened when a single planet controlled the fate of every world? What happened when time itself could be bent to the will of one species? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the real danger wasn't from the alien factions that had fought against us. It was from Earth itself. I stood with Marcus on the bridge once again, watching as Earth loomed below us, its surface bathed in the golden light of its sun. The clock continued to tick, its cycles dictating the flow of time across the galaxy. "Do you ever wonder," I asked quietly, "if we've gone too far? If maybe this kind of power shouldn't belong to anyone?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He gazed out at the stars, his expression unreadable. "Power always belongs to someone," he said finally. "The question is what they do with it." "And what will we do with it?" I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What will humanity do, now that they control time?" Marcus turned to me, his eyes hard and cold. "We'll do what we must." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. But as I stared out at the vast expanse of space, I couldn't help but feel a deep unease settle in my chest. Time was ours now, but for how long? The days after the battle felt strange. Time, for us on the ship, moved normally, or so it seemed. We could sleep, eat, train, and continue our routines without feeling the cosmic weight of what had happened to the Krellin and Tharkesh fleets. Yet, every time I looked out into space, I was reminded of the distortions I'd seen, the warping, the stretching, the erasure. It haunted me. Earth had won. No one doubted that. But as the crew and I moved through our daily tasks, something else was creeping in, a growing sense of unease. The universe had shifted in a way none of us could truly comprehend, and the implications of that shift were beginning to unravel in our minds. We weren't just part of a war anymore. We were part of something much larger, an era where time itself obeyed the whims of one world. and we had played a role in helping bring that about. It wasn't long before messages from the surviving factions began to flood in. Many, as we had expected, were desperate to align themselves with Earth's new power. No one wanted to risk being erased from existence the way the Krellin and Tharkesh had been. Entire empires were bending the knee, some even offering tribute in exchange for the security that came with Earth's control over time. But not everyone was willing to submit. As Saren and I reviewed the incoming reports, it became clear that resistance was building among the outer worlds, the fringe systems that had always held a strong independent streak. They didn't trust Earth, and they didn't want to be ruled by a planet that now dictated the flow of time. "They're organizing," Saren said, his tone grim. "Small factions, but they're banding together. They call themselves the Free Chronos Alliance." I raised an eyebrow at the name. Free Chronos? They think they can break away from time itself. Saren shrugged. "I suppose they believe they can resist Earth's influence somehow. They've been rallying worlds that refuse to adopt the new calendar, but," he trailed off, tapping the console in front of him, "there's something else." I glanced at him, my unease growing. "What?" "They're being supported by a rogue Krellin faction, one that survived the battle." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. We saw what happened to them." "I thought the same thing," Saren admitted. "But it turns out some of them were far enough from the main engagement that they weren't completely erased. They managed to retreat before the worst of it hit them. Now they're regrouping, and they found allies among the resistance." My mind raced. This changed everything. If any Krellin ships had survived, they would be dangerous. Desperate, but dangerous. And with a growing rebellion on the fringes of the galaxy, Earth's dominance might not be as secure as we had thought. "What's their goal?" I asked, my voice tight. Saren looked down at the console, his fingers flying over the controls as he accessed more reports. "They claim they want to restore balance, whatever that means. They're saying Earth's control over time is unnatural, and they're gathering support from worlds that are terrified of what happened to the Krellin fleet. Some of them think Earth's clock will eventually come for them too." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. And maybe they're right. Saren's eyes flicked up to meet mine, a troubled look on his face. "We've already seen what the clock can do to those who resist." I leaned back in my seat, rubbing my temples as the weight of the situation pressed down on me. "So what's the plan? Are we going to try to crush this rebellion before it gains momentum?" Saren hesitated. "That's what Command wants. But some of the council members are pushing for diplomacy. They think we should negotiate with the fringe worlds, offer them some kind of compromise." "Compromise?" I scoffed. "What kind of compromise do you offer when you control time itself?" Saren didn't answer, and the silence that followed was heavy with uncertainty. Later that evening, Marcus called me to the bridge. When I arrived, he was standing at the viewport, as he often did, watching the stars beyond. But something about his posture was different this time, tense, almost contemplative. "You heard about the resistance?" he asked, not turning to face me. "I did," I replied, stepping up beside him. "Saren said they're calling themselves the Free Chronos Alliance." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the stars. "They think they can break free from us. They think they can exist outside of Earth's influence." I frowned. "Do you think they have a chance?" His gaze finally shifted to me, and I saw a glimmer of something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Doubt. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "What we've done, it's unprecedented. There's no roadmap for how this plays out." I stared at him, surprised by his honesty. Marcus had always seemed so certain, so resolute in his belief that Earth's dominance was inevitable. But now, faced with the growing rebellion, it seemed even he was beginning to question the limits of what we had unleashed. "If they're afraid of us," I said carefully, "maybe we should show them that Earth isn't their enemy. We could offer them terms, something that would ease their fears." Marcus shook his head. "Fear is what keeps them in line. Without it, they'll try to rise up again and again." "So what, then? We erase them like we did the Krellin." He turned away from me, His jaw clenched. We don't need to erase them. Not yet. But we can remind them of what's at stake. I felt a pit forming in my stomach. What does that mean? Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured to the clock interface on the bridge wall, a display that showed Earth's time, now the standard for the entire galaxy. The clock has power over time, yes, but it can do more than just slow or speed things up. It can adjust things. I stared at him, my pulse quickening. Adjust things? What are you talking about? He met my gaze, and I saw a cold determination in his eyes. We can make time move differently for the worlds that resist. Stretch it out. Slow it down. Make their days last longer, their nights endless. We don't have to destroy them. We just have to show them what it means to live outside of Earth's time. My blood ran cold at the implication. He was talking about a form of torture slow, insidious, and inescapable. They'll beg to join us, Marcus said softly, and when they do, they'll understand that there's no place in this galaxy for defiance. I looked at him, struggling to find the words. But that's monstrous. Necessary, he corrected. The galaxy needs order, and Earth is the only power that can provide it. I shook my head, feeling a deep sense of revulsion rising within me. You can't just bend entire civilizations to your will like that. Time isn't something to be toyed with. Marcus stepped closer, his expression hardening. Time is ours now, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure the galaxy understands that. I left the bridge feeling more conflicted than ever. The power we had gained was undeniable, but the cost both to ourselves and to the galaxy was becoming clearer with each passing day. The Free Chronos Alliance might have been small, but their resistance was a reminder that not everyone would accept Earth's dominance without a fight. And as Marcus prepared to wield time as a weapon once again, I found myself wondering how far we were willing to go, and whether there was any line we wouldn't cross. The next few cycles passed in tense silence. On the outside, we went about our duties as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the weight of Marcus' words pressing down on me. The threat of altering time to crush the resistance hung over us like a dark cloud, and though Marcus believed in its necessity, I wasn't so sure anymore. The galaxy had shifted, that much was clear. But at what point did our control of time stop being a solution and start becoming tyranny? It wasn't until the call came in from the Free Chronos Alliance that everything reached a boiling point. We had been expecting some kind of action from them, a formal declaration of rebellion, or perhaps an attack on one of the fringe systems under Earth's influence. But instead, the message was short and simple, transmitted directly to our ship. They want to talk, Saren said, his tone cautious as he relayed the message. They're offering to negotiate. I looked at him, surprised. Negotiate? After all their talk about breaking free from Earth's influence? Saren nodded. It's a trap. It has to be. They're trying to draw us into something. Marcus, standing at the helm, said nothing for a long moment. His eyes were fixed on the console, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. We'll accept their offer. Arrange a meeting. Both Saren and I stared at him in disbelief. You're seriously going to meet with them? I asked, incredulous. What makes you think they won't try to ambush us? They won't, Marcus said confidently. Not yet. They're not ready for a full confrontation. They know they can't win. Saren folded his arms, skeptical. And if they try to play games? Marcus' gaze hardened. Then we'll show them what happens when you defy Earth's time. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, a small, uninhabited planet in a system far from Earth's direct reach. The Free Chronos Alliance had insisted on this, likely fearing that any closer proximity to Earth would allow us to manipulate the flow of time against them. Marcus, Saren, and I made our way to the designated location aboard a smaller, unarmed vessel. We weren't foolish enough to go unprepared, of course. Our ship was cloaked, and Earth's fleet was positioned nearby, ready to respond if the meeting went south. As we descended toward the planet's surface, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of foreboding. The world was barren, with only jagged rock formations and the occasional dust storm breaking the monotony of the landscape. It was a fitting place for a discussion that might decide the fate of the galaxy. We landed in a clearing surrounded by towering stone spires, their shadows stretching long in the planet's dim light. Waiting for us was a small delegation from the Free Kronos Alliance, 4 individuals, each representing different factions of the Resistance. I recognized one of them immediately, the Krellin commander, Rukter. His presence was a reminder that not all of the Krellin fleet had been erased during the battle. His eyes burned with defiance as he stood at the head of the group, his posture rigid, as though he were daring us to try something. Beside him were representatives from 2 other alien species I didn't immediately recognize, likely from fringe worlds that had joined the rebellion in recent weeks. And finally, there was a human. I hadn't expected to see one of our own among the Free Kronos Alliance, but there he was, a man with graying hair and a look of grim determination in his eyes. He wore no insignia, no uniform, but there was no mistaking the sharpness of his gaze. Marcus, flanked by Saren and me, stepped forward to address them. "You requested this meeting," Marcus said, his voice steady. "What do you want?" Rukter sneered, his mandibles clicking. "What we want is freedom from your tyranny, from your twisted manipulation of time. You think you've won, but we're still here, and as long as we stand, your reign is not absolute." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You came all this way to make speeches." The human among them stepped forward, cutting off Rukter's retort. "We came to offer a solution," he said, his tone more measured. "A way for this war to end without further destruction." I could see Marcus' muscles tense slightly at the word solution. He didn't trust them, and neither did I, but he remained composed. "Go on," Marcus said. The man met Marcus' gaze evenly. "You've shown us what Earth's control of time can do. But power like that, it won't last forever. The galaxy will rise against you, sooner or later. The Free Kronos Alliance is just the beginning." I could see Marcus was unimpressed. "You underestimate Earth." "No," the man replied. "We understand Earth too well. Which is why we're offering you a choice. Relinquish your control over the galaxy's time. Let the planets return to their own cycles, their own calendars. If you do that, we will stand down. The rebellion will end." Marcus didn't react at first, simply staring at the man as if weighing his words. Then, with deliberate slowness, he shook his head. "You want us to give up the very thing that has made peace possible in this galaxy? The thing that has prevented chaos? That's not a solution, that's surrender." The human's eyes narrowed. "It's the only way to avoid a war you can't win." I felt a spike of tension in the air, as though the very fabric of time itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood firm, his voice cold as ice. "We've already won." That was when everything exploded, literally. A thunderous roar shook the ground beneath us as a series of detonations went off, sending debris flying through the air. I barely had time to react before I was thrown to the ground, my ears ringing from the blast. Saren pulled me up, shouting something I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to hear his words to know what had happened. The Free Kronos Alliance had sprung their trap. Chaos erupted around us as Marcus drew his weapon, firing at the retreating figures of the rebel delegation. The Krellin commander, Rukter, was already making his escape, his forces firing back as they fled toward their hidden ships. For a moment, I thought we were done, for that this had been a suicidal mission all along. But then, through the haze of dust and smoke, I saw something that chilled me to my core. The human, the one who had led the negotiations, wasn't fleeing. He stood there, in the middle of the battlefield, completely unaffected by the carnage around him, and in his hand, he held a device. A clock. Not unlike Earth's clock, but different. Alien. "Stop him," I shouted, but it was too late. With a flick of his wrist, the man activated the device, and the world around us seemed to lurch. Time distorted once again, but this time it wasn't Earth's doing. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was Marcus' voice, shouting over the chaos. "They've found their own clock." and then everything went black. I awoke in darkness, my body heavy with exhaustion and confusion. The first sensation that pierced the haze was the faint, rhythmic thrum of machinery, a heartbeat of technology that felt both foreign and familiar. As I regained consciousness, fragmented memories rushed back, each one colliding with the next like stars in a cosmic collision. I was Rakra, a survivor of the Free Chronos Alliance, and I had witnessed the chaos of our rebellion. The meeting with the humans had turned into a disaster. Time itself had unraveled before my eyes when the human negotiator activated the device, fracturing our timelines and spawning chaos across the galaxy. I blinked against the darkness, finally managing to push myself into a sitting position. As my vision adjusted, I found myself in a small chamber, the walls shimmering with strange, pulsing lights. The air was thick with tension, and I could hear voices murmuring beyond the door. Pushing myself to my feet, I stumbled toward the source of the sound, my heart racing. Had they captured me, or had I somehow been rescued? I felt a gnawing sense of dread. What if I was in the hands of the humans? My thoughts raced with the implications of my predicament. As I reached the door, I hesitated. What if I was stepping into a trap? But curiosity propelled me forward. With a deep breath, I pressed the door panel, and it slid open with a hiss. The room I entered was filled with a mix of human and alien technology. Flickering screens displayed chaotic images of different planets, some engulfed in turmoil, others eerily quiet, as if the inhabitants were paralyzed by the temporal disruption. At the center of the room stood a group of familiar faces: Marcus, the human captain I had confronted in the previous encounter, and several of his crew members. Their expressions were a mix of worry and determination. "Rakra!" Marcus exclaimed, relief flooding his features. "You're awake." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Where am I? What happened?" Marcus gestured for me to take a seat. "You're safe, for now. We brought you to our ship after the explosion. You were unconscious for a while." I sank into a chair, still processing his words. "The device, the timelines, what are we going to do?" Marcus exchanged a glance with his crew, his brows furrowing. "That's why we need to talk. The explosion created rifts, time anomalies, and now they're spreading. Each faction is trying to exploit them, but it's leading to unpredictable consequences." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat dry. "Different timelines are bleeding into one another," one of his crew members, a tech specialist named Saren, explained. "There are reports of multiple versions of planets existing simultaneously, each with their own histories. The longer this goes on, the more dangerous it becomes." "And the renegade factions?" I pressed, remembering the chaos that had unfolded during our meeting. Marcus nodded grimly. "They're using the turmoil to their advantage. They believe this is their chance to strike back. But what they don't realize is that the longer they fight, the more unstable everything becomes. We could end up destroying entire systems." A wave of guilt washed over me. I had been part of the rebellion. My desire for freedom had pushed us into this mess. "We have to stop them. But how?" "That's what we need to figure out," Marcus said, leaning forward. "You've been part of the Free Chronos Alliance. You know their strategies, their leaders. We need your help to find a way to unite our forces against them before it's too late." I hesitated, torn between my loyalty to my people and the potential consequences of our actions. And what if I'm betraying my own kind? "Your kind?" Marcus shot back, frustration lacing his voice. "You've seen what this fight has done. You know that we need to work together to save the galaxy. We can't keep going down this path of destruction." His words struck a chord within me. The Krellin were my people, but they were also a force for chaos. I had seen how power could corrupt, how it could lead to destruction. "I'll help you," I said finally, feeling a surge of determination. "But we need to move quickly. We can't allow the renegade factions to gain any more ground." Marcus nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Good. We'll need to reach out to the leaders of the Krellin and the other factions. There's a chance we can find common ground before the conflict escalates." As we began discussing our next steps, A sudden alarm blared through the ship, cutting through our conversation. The lights flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. "What now?" Saren asked, rushing to his console. "We're detecting multiple ships approaching." "Are they friend or foe?" Marcus demanded. Saren's fingers danced across the controls, his brow furrowing in concentration. "It's hard to tell, but they're broadcasting a distress signal. It's coming from a nearby planet." "Can we intercept it?" Marcus asked. Saren nodded. "We can, but we need to make a decision fast. If it's a trap..." "We can't leave anyone stranded," I interrupted, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Not now." Marcus looked at me, then nodded. "Set a course for the planet. We'll investigate." The ship surged forward, navigating through the chaotic stars. My heart raced as I thought about what we might find. The galaxy was unraveling, and time itself was at stake. But in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. If we could save whoever was sending out that signal, perhaps it could be a turning point. As we approached the planet, the surface came into view, a beautiful blue and green orb, marred by the dark shadows of conflict. The atmosphere was thick with turmoil, and I felt the weight of every decision pressing upon me. We touched down on a rocky landing pad, the ground vibrating beneath us. The air was charged with tension as we stepped out of the ship, weapons drawn and senses alert. "Stay close," Marcus instructed, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know what we're walking into." I nodded, my heart pounding as we moved forward. The landscape was desolate, scarred by battles long forgotten, and in the distance I could see figures emerging from the shadows, some human, some alien. "Whoever they are, they need our help," I said, determined to reach them before it was too late. As we advanced, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My instincts screamed at me, warning me of unseen dangers lurking in the corners of my mind. And then, just as we reached the edge of the clearing, everything erupted into chaos once again. The world erupted around us. A sudden barrage of energy blasts zipped through the air, striking the ground just inches from where we stood. Dust and debris kicked up, obscuring our vision as we dove for cover behind a large boulder, the air charged with the acrid smell of scorched earth. "Return fire!" Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he leaned out from behind the rock, firing his weapon toward the unseen assailants. I followed his lead, taking aim at the vague silhouettes moving in the haze of dust. I could barely make out the forms of humanoid figures, some familiar, some not, but I recognized the insignia on one of their uniforms. "Those are Krellan forces," I exclaimed, my heart sinking. "They're attacking the humans." "Great," Marcus muttered, gritting his teeth as he continued to shoot at the hostile figures. "Just what we need. More fighting among ourselves." I peered out from behind the rock, my mind racing. This conflict was spiraling out of control. We had barely begun to forge a fragile alliance, and now my people were engaging in a full-scale battle against the humans. "Stay focused," I urged, pulling Marcus back to the ground as another blast struck the boulder, sending shockwaves through my body. "We can't let this escalate. We have to find a way to stop them." "Agreed, but how?" he replied, frustration lacing his voice. I thought back to the stories my elders had shared about our kind, how we thrived on conflict, but were also capable of great unity. "We need to find their leader," I said, glancing toward the battlefield. "If we can reach them, we can talk sense into them before they do irreparable damage." "All right," Marcus replied, determination flickering in his eyes. "We'll create a diversion. I'll draw their fire while you flank around to the left." "Got it," I said, already formulating a plan in my mind. "On three?" "On three." With a shared nod, I counted down. 1, 2, 3. I burst from behind the rock, sprinting toward the left side of the clearing. As I did, I could see Marcus drawing the Krellan fire, darting from cover to cover as he drew their attention away from me. I slipped through the chaos, my heart racing as I maneuvered closer to the skirmish. The sounds of blaster fire and shouts filled the air, mingling with the desperate cries of those caught in the crossfire. Ahead, I spotted a Krellan officer, recognizable by the ornate markings on his armor. I had seen him at previous gatherings, an influential figure within our ranks. If anyone could call off the attack, it would be him. As I approached, I felt a surge of adrenaline. My blood raced, and my instincts kicked in. I had to reach him before it was too late. I ducked behind a fallen piece of debris, my eyes locked onto the officer's back. "Lornak," I shouted, hoping he would hear me over the din. "It's Rokra. Stop this madness." He turned, surprise etched across his angular features. "Rokra? What are you doing here?" "Trying to prevent a war," I replied, glancing around to ensure I wasn't about to be shot. "This isn't the time for fighting among ourselves." He hesitated, caught between duty and reason. "They attacked first. We can't just let them." "They are our allies now," I interrupted, urgency spilling from my lips. "The humans are here to help us, but if you continue this attack, we'll lose everything. Our chance at unity will vanish." As I spoke, I could see doubt flickering in his eyes. The chaotic sounds of battle surrounded us, but I focused solely on him. "We need to stop this, Lornak. The galaxy is on the brink of destruction, and we can't afford to lose more lives in a fight that leads nowhere." The tension in his posture began to ease, the fight draining from his gaze. "You think they would accept a truce?" "I believe they would if we approach them with sincerity," I said, feeling hope blooming in my chest. "But we have to act fast. We need to meet them halfway." Lornak nodded, his demeanor shifting. "All right, let me signal for a ceasefire." As Lornak began relaying orders, I dashed back toward Marcus, relief washing over me as I approached him. He was still engaging the humans, but I could see that the tide was shifting. "Marcus," I called, waving my arms to catch his attention. He spotted me and ducked behind cover, confusion flashing across his face. "Rokra, what are you doing?" he shouted, glancing back at the fighting. "I spoke with Lornak," I said, desperation edging my voice. "We can stop this. He's agreed to call a ceasefire." Marcus hesitated, glancing around at the chaos. "Are you sure about this? How do we know they'll listen?" "They have to," I insisted. "We need to stop this fighting before it consumes us all." He took a deep breath, weighing his options. "Okay, I trust you. Let's see if we can get them to listen." As we moved back toward the center of the clearing, the sound of blaster fire began to dwindle, the shouts of combat giving way to an uneasy silence. I felt a mix of hope and dread as we approached the Krellan forces, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion. "Everyone, hold your fire!" Lornak's voice boomed across the clearing, his commanding presence cutting through the tension. "Stand down." The remaining fighters lowered their weapons, their gazes shifting between Lornak and Marcus. I could feel the weight of uncertainty hanging in the air, each moment stretching into eternity. "We're not enemies," I called out, stepping forward to stand beside Lornak. "We're fighting a common threat. We need to unite against the chaos that's tearing our galaxy apart." The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Marcus stepped forward, his expression open and earnest. "We've seen the devastation caused by our conflicts. We cannot let this spiral out of control any further." Lornak raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "I've spoken with Rokra. We cannot continue this path of destruction. We need to seek a new way forward together." As I looked out over the assembled crowd, I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes begin to change. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. "Let's discuss our next steps," I urged, feeling a wave of determination surge through me. "Before it's too late." Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "And what if we cannot trust you?" I turned, spotting a fierce-looking Krellan warrior pushing his way through the crowd. "You betrayed us once, Rokra. How do we know this isn't a ploy?" My heart sank as I felt the weight of his accusation. I did what I thought was right, but this is about survival now. We must band together to save ourselves from greater threats. The warrior's gaze hardened, but murmurs began to ripple through the crowd again. I sensed a flicker of understanding spreading among them, as they realized the truth of my words. But there was still doubt, and I had to quell it before it turned to anger. "Think of our home," I urged, my voice steady. "Think of the lives at stake. If we do not act now, we will all be consumed by this war." As I spoke, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was more than just a plea for unity. It was a chance to rewrite our destiny. The Krellin warrior looked at Lornak, then back at me. "And if you fail us again?" "Then we'll face the consequences together," I replied firmly, determination flooding my veins. "But we can't let fear dictate our choices. We need to unite for our survival, or we risk losing everything." The tension hung thick in the air, but slowly, I could see the warrior's resolve wavering. Lornak stepped forward, a hand raised to calm the crowd. "We need to take this chance. The galaxy is more than our past mistakes. Let's write a new chapter." And with that, a sense of quiet resolve began to settle over the assembled forces. Hope glimmered in the air, fragile yet undeniable. Marcus and I exchanged a glance, and I could see the determination mirrored in his eyes. We were on the brink of something greater, a chance for a new alliance, a new understanding. But lurking in the shadows, I knew there were those who would not accept this truce so easily. The renegade factions were still out there, waiting to exploit our weaknesses. We had taken the first step toward unity, but the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. "Let's begin discussions on how we can combat the chaos that threatens us," I said, my heart pounding in anticipation. "Together, we can forge a new future." The atmosphere shifted as Lornak and I stood together, our presence commanding the attention of both Krellin and humans alike. There was a palpable tension, an uneasy hope that rippled through the crowd. The possibility of unity felt tangible, yet I could sense the skepticism lingering like an unwelcome shadow. "We need to set clear terms for our alliance," I continued, stepping forward to face the assembled warriors. "The threat of the Abyssals is growing. If we want to survive, we must put aside our past grievances and focus on our common enemy." A murmur swept through the crowd, skepticism and intrigue dancing in their eyes. Some shifted uneasily, while others nodded in agreement. I couldn't help but wonder if they truly understood the stakes involved. "We must form a council," Lornak suggested, his voice steady. "A governing body composed of both Krellin and human representatives. Together, we can strategize and deploy our resources efficiently." Marcus stepped up beside me, catching my eye. "I volunteer to represent the humans," he said, determination etched on his face. "We need a voice for our side in this council, someone who can convey our needs and fears." "Then I shall represent the Krellin," Lornak replied, his expression resolute. "We will draft a charter that lays out the responsibilities and expectations of both sides." "Agreed," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "But we must act quickly. The Abyssals won't wait for us to decide our future." The crowd murmured again, this time with a sense of purpose. I could see warriors exchanging glances, the weight of our words sinking in. We were all aware of the threat, the chaos that the Abyssals had wrought upon the galaxy. "Let's begin forming our council," I said, my voice steady. "But we must also prepare our defenses. We cannot afford to be caught off guard." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, we gathered under the dim light of emergency flares. The air was thick with determination, each of us driven by the desire to protect our home from the encroaching darkness. Marcus and I sat at one end of the makeshift table, flanked by Lornak and several other Krellin representatives. Tension hummed in the air, but there was also an undercurrent of hope, an unspoken agreement that we were all in this together. "Let's begin," Lornak said, leaning forward, his fingers steepled before him. "We need to establish a clear chain of command, a way to share intelligence and resources efficiently." The discussions flowed back and forth, ideas clashing and melding as we forged our new alliance. Strategies were proposed, potential troop deployments discussed, and in the midst of it all, I felt a sense of unity blossoming. But beneath the surface, a nagging doubt lingered. How long would this fragile alliance hold? What if dissenting factions within both our groups chose to undermine our efforts? Just as I was about to voice my concerns, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath us. I exchanged worried glances with Marcus and Lornak, the flickering flares casting long shadows on our faces. "What was that?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowing. "An earthquake?" one of the Krellin warriors suggested, looking around nervously. "No, it feels different," I said, a chill creeping down my spine. "It's too rhythmic." Before I could finish, the ground trembled again, more violently this time, sending everyone reeling. Flares sputtered and flickered as dust rose into the air, obscuring our vision. Suddenly, from the darkness beyond the clearing, I saw them figures emerging from the shadows, clad in dark, menacing armor. "The Abyssals!" I shouted, my heart racing. "They're here!" Chaos erupted around us. Warriors scrambled for their weapons, and the tentative unity we had forged was immediately threatened as panic set in. The flickering light of the flares revealed the twisted forms of the Abyssals, their skeletal features illuminated by the chaos. "They're attacking our position," one of the Krellin warriors shouted, pointing a shaking finger toward the encroaching figures. Lornak quickly raised his weapon, his voice ringing with authority. "Hold your ground. We stand together, or we fall apart." I drew my blaster, heart pounding as I took my place beside him. "We've trained for this. Focus your fire on the front line." The first wave of Abyssals charged forward, their movements fluid and predatory. As they closed in, I felt an overwhelming surge of adrenaline course through me. The training and preparation we had undergone rushed back to me, and I focused on the battle ahead. Blaster fire erupted, illuminating the night as Krellin and humans fought side by side. I aimed for the nearest Abyssal, pulling the trigger with steady resolve. The energy bolt struck true, and the creature crumpled to the ground. But more were advancing, their numbers seemingly endless. "Push them back," Marcus yelled, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. "We can't let them break through our lines." I glanced at him, seeing the fire in his eyes. This was our moment, our chance to prove that unity was stronger than division. The fighting intensified, the battlefield becoming a chaotic symphony of shouts, blaster fire, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. I fought with everything I had, dodging and weaving through the fray, driven by a primal instinct to survive. Just as it seemed the tide might shift in favor of the Abyssals, Lornak rallied the Krellin warriors. "We are not alone," he bellowed, firing his weapon into the fray. "Fight for each other, for our future." At his words, I felt a renewed surge of strength. The Krellin soldiers fought fiercely, their alien forms moving with grace and power. I fought alongside them, pushing against the oncoming tide of Abyssals. In the chaos, I spotted a larger figure at the back of the attacking force. It moved with an unnatural grace, its crimson armor glinting in the dim light. This was the Abyssal commander, and I knew that if we were to turn the tide, we had to take him down. "Marcus," I shouted, pointing toward the commander. "We need to take him out." He nodded, determination hardening his features. "Let's do it." Together, we pushed forward, weaving through the melee. Blaster bolts whizzed past us, and I could feel the heat of the battle as we drew closer to our target. Just as we reached the commander, he turned, his gaze locking onto mine. His eyes, dark and empty, sent a chill down my spine. "You think you can stop me?" he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. Without waiting for a response, he lunged at us, his movements blindingly fast. I barely had time to react, raising my weapon just as he struck, sending my blaster flying from my grip. I stumbled back, fighting to regain my footing, but Marcus was already there, swinging his weapon in a wide arc. The commander barely dodged, but I could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Now!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. With newfound determination, we coordinated our attacks, dodging and weaving as we fought the Abyssal commander. Every strike felt like a fight for our very existence, a battle to determine the future of our fragile alliance. The fight raged on, each moment stretching into eternity as we exchanged blows with the commander. It was a dance of death, the stakes impossibly high. Finally, in a moment of pure instinct, I feinted to the left, drawing the commander's attention. Marcus seized the opportunity, thrusting his weapon forward and firing. The energy bolt struck true, hitting the commander square in the chest. With a final roar of rage, the abyssal commander collapsed to the ground, his body twitching before going still. The battlefield fell silent as the remaining abyssals hesitated, glancing back at their fallen leader. "Now's our chance," I yelled, my heart racing. "Push them back." As if a dam had broken, our forces surged forward, fueled by adrenaline and the hope of victory. We fought with everything we had, driving the abyssals back, reclaiming our territory one step at a time. But as we fought, I knew this was just the beginning. The battle had shown us our strength, but it had also revealed the cracks in our unity. We had to remain vigilant, for there were those who would seek to exploit our vulnerabilities. With the last of the abyssals retreating into the darkness, I took a moment to catch my breath. The night air was thick with the scent of smoke and sweat, and the sounds of battle began to fade. "Did we really just do that?" Marcus asked, panting as he wiped sweat from his brow. "We did," I replied, a smile breaking through the tension. "We fought together." Lornak approached, his expression grave but triumphant. "This is only the beginning," he said, surveying the battlefield. "We have much to do if we are to survive what lies ahead." "Together," I affirmed, feeling a sense of unity in the air. "We'll face whatever comes our way." As we began the task of regrouping, I felt a deep sense of determination welling up within me. The path forward would not be easy, but if we could hold on to this alliance, we might just have a chance. The abyssals may have been pushed back for now, but I knew they would return, and when they did, we would need to be ready. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the battlefield, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of relief and anticipation. We had pushed the abyssals back for now, but I could feel the weight of the coming storm hanging in the air. "Gather the injured," I shouted to the nearest warriors, urgency threading through my voice. "We need to secure the perimeter and ensure everyone is accounted for." The others sprang into action, forming teams to assist the wounded and reinforce our defenses. As I moved through the remnants of the battlefield, I took stock of our forces. Despite our victory, the toll had been heavy. Many were injured, and a few of our bravest lay lifeless, their sacrifice a stark reminder of the stakes we faced. "Lornak," I called out, spotting the Krellin leader overseeing the triage efforts. He turned, his expression grim but resolute. "We need to establish a stronger line of defense," he said, surveying the chaos. "The abyssals will regroup. We cannot afford to be caught off guard again." I nodded, determination surging within me. We should also send scouts to gather intelligence on their movements. Knowing their strategies could give us an edge. "Agreed," Lornak replied, his sharp features softening momentarily. "But we need to communicate effectively with our allies. If we are to stand a chance, we must trust one another completely." As we spoke, Marcus approached, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes shone with the fire of our shared victory. "We did it, right?" he said, a hint of disbelief in his tone. "We actually pushed them back." "We did," I confirmed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But this battle was just a taste of what's to come. We need to prepare for the next confrontation." The council meeting was quickly convened, our makeshift war room buzzing with activity. Krellin and human warriors alike gathered around the table, maps spread out before us, our plans and strategies laid bare. "First, we need to address the immediate threat," I began, my voice steady. "We need to gather intel on the abyssals and determine their next move." The discussions were vigorous, voices rising and falling in a chaotic symphony of strategy. The Krellin provided insights into their battle tactics, while the humans shared our experiences in ground combat. It was a delicate balance, but slowly, we began to weave our knowledge into a cohesive plan. Days turned into weeks as we fortified our defenses, trained together, and built the trust that would be essential for our survival. The unity forged in the crucible of battle had taken root, transforming former enemies into allies with a shared purpose. We established regular patrols, sent scouts deep into abyssal territory, and even launched reconnaissance missions to gather intelligence. Every day brought new challenges, but also opportunities to learn from one another. During one of these reconnaissance missions, we captured a lone abyssal soldier, battered and scared, yet defiant. The council convened to determine what to do with him, and I felt the weight of the decision resting heavily on my shoulders. We could interrogate him, one of the Krillin warriors suggested, eyeing the abyssal with disdain. But what if he doesn't know anything? Marcus countered. Torturing him could backfire. We need information, not a martyr. After much debate, we agreed to treat the captured soldier with a semblance of respect. The Krellin provided their specialized interrogation techniques, and we learned that the Abyssals were indeed planning a larger assault. The night before the anticipated attack, we gathered under the stars, sharing stories and forging bonds that transcended our former divisions. The crackling fire illuminated our faces, casting shadows that danced across the clearing. "I never thought I'd be here," Marcus admitted, his voice contemplative. "Fighting alongside Krellin, it's surreal." Lornak nodded, his gaze distant. "We are all warriors in our own right. We fight not just for survival, but for the future we hope to build together." The gravity of his words settled over us. Tomorrow, we would face the Abyssals again. As the fire flickered, I felt a surge of hope. We were more than just humans and Krellin. We were a coalition, a family forged in the heat of battle, and together we could withstand anything. When the sun rose the next morning, the air crackled with tension. We stood shoulder to shoulder, our hearts pounding in unison. The Abyssals would come, and we would be ready. As the first wave of Abyssals charged at us, their grotesque forms emerging from the shadows, I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Hold the line," I roared, raising my weapon. The clash of our forces erupted like a storm, blaster fire illuminating the battlefield as we fought to defend our new home. The cacophony of battle echoed around us, but amidst the chaos, I could see the strength of our alliance shining through. Humans and Krellin fought side by side, covering each other's backs, every blow struck with purpose. We pushed back the Abyssals, refusing to yield an inch. With each fallen foe, our resolve only strengthened. Just when it seemed we had the upper hand, a new wave surged forward, larger and more organized than before. I caught sight of the Abyssal commander, a dark figure at the rear, rallying his forces. "Marcus, we need to take him out," I shouted, my voice barely rising above the din of battle. "Let's go," he replied, determination blazing in his eyes. We charged through the fray, dodging and weaving as we fought our way toward the commander. As we neared him, I raised my weapon, ready to fire. But just as I squeezed the trigger, the ground shook violently again. An explosion erupted behind us, throwing us to the ground. In the chaos, the Abyssal commander disappeared into the smoke, his form swallowed by the darkness. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to focus. "Get up! We need to regroup," I shouted to Marcus, pulling him to his feet. The battlefield was in disarray, but I could see our forces rallying. We had taken heavy losses, but the spirit of our alliance remained unbroken. With renewed determination, we fought back, driving the Abyssals toward the forest edge. The tide of battle began to shift, our unity overpowering the enemy's disarray. The Abyssals faltered, their ranks breaking as our blaster fire rained down upon them. The commander's absence left a void, and we seized the opportunity to push forward, relentless and determined. Finally, as the last of the Abyssals fled into the shadows, a cheer erupted among our forces. We had won not just a battle, but a war for our survival. "We did it!" Marcus shouted, a triumphant grin lighting up his face. Lornak raised his weapon in victory, his eyes gleaming with pride. "This is just the beginning," he declared. "Together, we will ensure that we are never threatened again." As we stood together, battered but unbroken, I knew that this alliance had forged something greater than we could have ever imagined. We had overcome our differences, united against a common foe, and emerged victorious. In the weeks that followed, we worked to rebuild and fortify our defenses. But more importantly, we laid the foundation for a new era, a coalition that would stand as a testament to what we could achieve when we put aside our differences. As we gathered to commemorate our victory, I looked around at my comrades, Krellin and humans alike, their faces reflecting a shared determination. "We will remember the sacrifices made here today," I said, addressing the crowd. "And we will honor them by standing together, always." The cheers of our alliance echoed through the clearing, a powerful reminder of our resilience and strength. Time passed, and as I stood on the lookout, gazing at the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The abyssals would not return unchallenged. We had forged a bond that would stand against the darkness, and I was confident that, together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a heart full of hope, I turned back toward the bustling camp, ready to embrace the future we had fought so hard to protect. Together, we would thrive.